Good evening. I'm Tim O'Connell, Chair of the Utility Board. It's 6 minutes after 5, so I'm going to go ahead and call us to order, excuse me. Elaine, do you want to go ahead and call the roll?
I'm happy to.
Thank you.
Chair O'Connell,
Here.
Vice Chair Quantz,
Present.
Board Member Majewski, Board Member Marshall,
Present.
Board Member Laird,
Here.
Board Member Milton,
Present.
Board Member Picorni.
Present.
Thank you.
Very good. Sounds like we have a quorum, so I will go ahead and call us to order. Are we aware, are there any public appearances?
There are no public appearances this evening.
Very good, thank you. I'll move on to regular business. Approval of the minutes of our last meeting back in July. They were included in your agenda packet. I take a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll move to approve the minutes for July 11.
For a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you. And moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll take a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Approves unanimously. All right. We're still waiting for Jason, but we have a very full agenda this evening. I don't know if you noticed. So I'd like to go ahead and get started if we can. The first item on the business is the update on the Water System Reliability Action Plan. Alan or Patrick, can any of you give us just an intro to that real quickly before we turn it over to the review? I mean, there's a lot of info here.
Yes, there is quite a bit of info. I will give you a short introduction and then I will turn it over to our team who's here tonight to give a presentation. So I'd like to introduce Melinda Friedman and Chris McMean from Confluence Engineering. They've been hired on by the city as a result of the April water emergency to look at the water system on Mercer Island and look at opportunities for improving the reliability of the water supply. And some of you may recall that the city worked with Confluence several years ago on a different project, which I will let Melinda maybe give a little background on. And they're here to give a report, and we'll be back to talk about the utility board involvement in this process following their presentation. So I am going to turn it over to Melinda and Chris.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, thank you, Elaine, and good evening, Chair O'Connell and the Utility Board. We really appreciate being able to present to you tonight and to continue our work with the city. As Elaine mentioned, we did a similar process. It was actually almost 10 years ago in 2014 in response to the E. coli water emergency, where we went through and evaluated processes and compared to best practices and came up with a action plan and after action plan in response to improving water quality protection, and especially with regard to E. coli. So today, Chris is going to describe to you the process that we are undertaking with regard to developing a water supply reliability action plan. And just by way of background quickly, we're not, the focus of our work isn't so much on an evaluation of what happened and why. It's really to look forward and to develop a plan and gain a consensus on actions and steps the city can take to improve water supply reliability. So with that lens, that's the work we are doing. So I will pass it off to Chris now to dive in.
Okay, thank you, Melinda. We do appreciate, Chair O'Connell, members of the board, we appreciate the opportunity to talk with you tonight. We will start with a brief set of slides to quickly review the events that brought us together on this topic, mostly in pictures, a few words, but we know you've seen this graphic. It's the sub-regional system that brings SPU water to Mercer Island. There's a lot of information here, but the key part that we want to highlight here is in red. It's the 30-inch steel pipeline that was originally built in the late 60s, provided water to the island for many, many years, but Unfortunately, the piers upon which it was built have been sinking, so Seattle took that line out of service, and really this work was about disconnecting it from the mains that are still bringing you water so that it didn't endanger the integrity of that system. So that was the core of the project here. This is a slide that SPU prepared and shared previously. The call outs here are intended to, do show the intended work to separate that 30-inch pipe, which is not in red anymore, but let's see here, I'm going to do that. Separate that pipe again from your system. And then the orange callouts here are what went wrong. And essentially 2 valves that were closed in the course of the work that didn't reopen as intended. So the key point here is it just amplifies that between this point of connection to the regional Cedar supply line and where it leaves the mainland and goes to the island, you have a single line, and that of course has its vulnerability. So part of the work we've been doing involves reviewing the operational data that occurred during the event. Fortunately, or frankly, through really good operational planning, the city has a robust data acquisition system, and we were able to see how that shutdown looked graphically, and that's really what this chart shows. The black and orange lines are the twin reservoir water elevations, both pre-event, during the event, and then afterward through recovery and afterwards. The blue line here is the intermittent supply from Seattle, and you likely are already aware of this, but that supply comes on and turns off with the needs to refill and allow storage to draw down. And that's really important to maintain water quality, but it does start and stop. And of course, you see here the long drawdown period during the valve repair event, which at 89 hours was roughly 2 times the intended duration. So just a couple highlights here. One, Mercer Island made the very good decision, prudent. That's how I originally said it, but I changed that to excellent because it really was a very good decision to maximize that amount of water you had stored pre-event. Wouldn't have been necessary if everything had gone per normal, but everything didn't go per normal. So that was a really strong decision. The fact that the SPU supplier operates off and on is something for us to look at through the course of this event. It can induce some pressure variation that really showed up in this data. So it's something that we learned. And then the other, I guess, thing to point out here is that when that Seattle supply started back up, you did see some up and down. And that really highlighted that a repair and a shutdown and a restoration have a lot of dynamics involved. And in this case, likely air got into that system. We know air got into that system, but just the process of bringing the system back to life, has its challenges. So a lot of information in just a little bit of data. This chart shows the measured water flows out of storage during the event. So this chart starts really at midnight of the event. And what we see here is a fairly typical diurnal demand pattern. So this was essentially the water feeding the entire island, and that included Shorewood, of course, during this event. And you see the twin peaks of morning and evening and the typical low demands of late night. And you see this pattern repeat. And what I wanted to highlight here was really when the call went out, when the repair was not going as planned and their call went out for conservation, you really see it show up in the data. So I think you had a good sense of it intuitively, but the data showed that the evening peak, which would be the first one really that customers could respond to after the calls went out, dropped by 15%, and then the next morning peak dropped by 20%. So with very little notice, and really customers didn't, for the most part, customers didn't feel this, right? They didn't see their pressure go down in most cases. To them, service was normal. So for them to hear the message and respond to it, I think is really, bodes well for your community and the communication that occurred through that event. So the project objectives are to really look, at this precipitating event, but also other emergencies that might face the island, and try to identify some near and long-term opportunities to improve that reliability, resiliency. We do use that word a bit interchangeably, to reduce risk. So our approach, has really been to work collaboratively with the city experts, and you have a lot of them, and the emergency planning, system planning work that's already in place. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, and you've done a lot of good planning and good work. Layer on industry best practices, maybe some new ideas on ways to bolster resiliency, and identify a set of activities that could be brought to bear, if you will. Again, thinking near term, midterm, long term. And then identify a set of evaluation criteria against which to assess those actions. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. Really to ultimately bring out those trade-offs that come with these set of options. So what's ahead here is to apply those evaluation criteria you'll see to the action items, to narrow the list, refine that set of opportunities, and then bring them to you, the utility board, and then ultimately to the council to endorse a path forward. So the action we've broken them into really three categories: infrastructure, things you'd have to build; programmatic, things you can do with your current staff; and then we talk about personnel. So examples might be additional pipelines, and we know some of these things you've already thought about, you've already brought forward as ideas. We're looking at those additional pipelines and maybe variations on that theme: storage, having more water on the island, and then looking at the whole supply portfolio. I think during the SPU brief to the council, I know at least asked about lake water, surrounded by water. What about that? So we will look at that kind of thing. Programmatic examples, really relate to planning, maybe building out that planning, operational maintenance opportunities that might improve resilience, and then of course community engagement is really a key programmatic element that you've exploited once, and I know you will again as needed. All these things take people, whether these are staffing needs, whether it's reprioritizing staff effort or changing the staff profile, and then training opportunities that might come along with some of these solutions. So these are the buckets of criteria, the criteria evaluation categories that we've identified. I'll just briefly hit on them. Quantity and quality, are key levels of service indicators, but they do have to be considered separately, because there are solutions that bring additional water, for example, but that water might not be potable without further investment. So you might have potable and non-potable options, and those have really different implications in terms of what they get you in terms of resiliency and the effort that comes with it. Duration of relief is a reflection both of the robustness of an individual action, but also the magnitude of event it will mitigate. For example, if you build a significant amount of storage on island, that will buy you days, it won't buy you months. So in the more extreme events that might lose the Seattle supply, for example, for a long period of time, storage won't do a lot for you. It'll do a little bit for you, but ease of activation really involves how quickly a solution can be brought into service. One of the challenges, that we certainly heard from city staff, and it's very common in the Puget Sound area, is a lot of times the people who do the implementation of these sorts of solutions don't live in the immediate service area. It's common. So how easily something can be brought to bear is important. if it's already in service, it's seamless. City ownership is city control. So that has its own set of values. The schedule to implement is important because large complex solutions may take years to permit, design, implement, finance, and other activities might be able to be brought to bear much more quickly. And of course, cost is cost. We don't live in a world of infinite resources, so that always has to be considered. So the next steps really in our work plan are to apply those evaluation criteria to the action list, refine that list. That's really just begun. And we've been working with the city in a workshop format, and that work will continue. We have currently a scheduled status update program for mid-October with City Council. Out of that work together, we will develop a draft action plan. We will, refine that plan toward a final action plan in Q1 of 2024, and then ultimately bringing it to you and then to the council in late Q1 or late Q2 2024. That's the high-level overview. I think we have time for questions, although I know you have a busy schedule. So it's your pleasure.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Melinda, as well. Just on behalf of the board, there are a couple of us still who were on the board the last time we had Confluence's help. So we very much appreciate that, and we very much look forward to it again. We do have a full agenda, but we do also have some time for questions. And then I know there's at least a small action item for the board on this, but I guess I'll open it up first for questions. Chris, unless you think you need to, I think this will work easier if you stop sharing your screen.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So we'll open it up for questions from board members for Confluence, and we also have a number of city staff here as well. So, colleagues, have at. Chris, I see no questions. It's just you did a great job presenting.
George has his hands up. George has his, yeah.
Oh, okay, now I'm not seeing that, George. If you actually initiated a hand, I didn't see it, but please, oh, there it is. Now it pops up. Great. Please, go right ahead.
I just thought it was a really good comment that additional storage is a short-term solution versus additional supply. I wasn't thinking about it in those terms, but I thought that was a really heads-up point to make, so I appreciate that.
Oh, great question. Great comment. Others?
I mean, I guess just a comment. I'm actually kind of surprised at the scale of the change in the water system demand based on, I guess, literally in my house, the reduction was significantly more than 15%. But that's because I guess probably it was more on my mind, and so I reinforced it to, my wife, and so yeah, we were using very, very little. But it is interesting in the sense of with as much discussion as there was on the boards and next door and all the various signs and everything, that even with that, only a 15% reduction was able to be kind of pulled at the peak times. It's a good thing it didn't go any longer, getting down to whether that 9-foot level. It looked like that was, I know it can't go much lower than that before it starts losing pressure. So it was fascinating.
It was a nice response from the island. That's for sure. Anyone else? Well, Chris and Melinda, don't take it the wrong way that there's not a lot of questions, because this was a big topic at our last meeting. We spent a lot of time hearing from Seattle Public Utilities, who I think it's fair to say it was a good presentation, and they had an appropriate attitude about the whole situation. So this is something this body's been looking at for a while. Jason, I see you've joined us. That's great. I know there is a desire to have some members of the board participate in this study. So do you want to maybe kind of brief us on that?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, Jason Kittner, Chief of Operations. I'm back. I'm happy to be back. Excited to be back. This is my first utility board, and our team sure didn't, hold back. We've got a packed agenda, and I'm excited about it. We are looking for 2 volunteers from the board to participate in our working group as we work to develop this draft action plan and ultimately the action plan that will be presented to the council. We really like the members of the utility board to participate in this process. We think it's advantageous to it, and we're looking for 2 volunteers to help participate in it. I will also just say, because I briefed Chair O'Connell and Vice Chair Quantz about this, we may have some additional opportunities on some other things coming down the pike for board volunteerism and special projects. One of those might be potentially a discussion over the issuance of bonds and the financial aspect of some of the utility components that we have in the works. So I'll just throw it out there in case there's a lot of interest. Maybe there's not a lot of interest, but I'm hoping there is. We're at least looking for 2 people to participate in this working group as we move forward. And ultimately, as we share this with the council and start taking action on some of the fall through items. But it's great to be back, and it's great to see Melinda and Chris here with Confluence. We're in great hands with the work they're doing for us.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I recall that we've done this before on big projects. Those of you who have been on the board for a while, you may recall that we had a couple of our members participate in the committee that helped evaluate the solid waste contract, and we thought that was a very useful exercise. So as Jason said, we're opening it up for volunteers. Meredith, I see you raised your hand already. Need to unmute yourself, Meredith. You can see your lips moving, but we can't hear you. Is it just me, or can anybody else hear Meredith?
I can't hear her.
No, I think, Meredith, we can't hear you. I think it might be a connection issue. And my American Sign Language is not nearly good enough.
She's saying she wants to get out and then she'll come back in.
Do you want to volunteer? Just say yes or no. Is that why you're? Yes. Okay. So we have one volunteer.
Oh, she has a question.
Why don't you rejoin, and we'll have you in a moment. Is there anyone else interested in volunteering to serve on the water reliability study? George, was that you raising your hand, or were you just did you just?
I was just scratching my neck.
Yeah. Okay. If you want to volunteer, though, time is good.
One of the, if I understood Jason correctly, one of the opportunities was on the finance and the contract aspects, and I'd be interested in that. I mean, my background is in economics, and I'm always harping on cost increases, so I'd like to throw my hat in the ring for that.
Yeah, I share, as those of you who've been on the board for a while know, our bonding has been my particular issue for about 10 years. So I'm going to save myself for that one as well. Anybody else interested? I see Meredith is in the process of rejoining. Anyone else interested?
Tim, I will tentatively raise my hand, but I just do I need to do a conflict check. This gets close to my firm's work, so I want to just make sure that that's.
Oh, that's very, very good of you, Will, to be conscious of that. Thank you. But Jason, I think we have at least tentatively your 2 volunteers.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we're going to keep the board obviously well involved and included in this process as well. But appreciate Will and Meredith stepping forward and participating in this process, and more to come. But there's much more to come on this topic.
Yes. Very good.
And just as it was unclear if Meredith was volunteering or just had a question about volunteering. So
I saw that thumbs up as saying she was volunteering.
Yeah, but then she did this, so I wasn't sure.
Meredith, are you back with us yet?
Looks like she's still working on it. But I just wanted to say I'll put my name in as an alternate. I'm not sure. I'm going to be traveling a bunch over the next several months, so I'm not really sure exactly on the timing side. But in case Meredith was not stepping forward to volunteer, I can try and fill in as well. So.
Very good. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate your commitment to the process. Thank you. Is there any other discussion on this issue? Hearing none. Oh,
This is George. The only question I've got is how will we be notified of when we have to do something or attend something? Do we have to go back to the Mercer Island address website, or will we be notified individually? I'm just curious as to how we keep in touch.
In terms of this project, or what specifically in touch on what?
Whatever it is we volunteered to do.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, we'll set up an email distribution list for it. George, in terms of the economics and bonding piece, that'll probably be the first part of next year, most likely when that comes. So you have some time, but we'll set up an email distribution list for the team that's going to be working on this specific project, and we'll set up meeting invites and things like that via email. So we'll make sure that Meredith and Will and possibly Steve are included in that, and then obviously as it comes back to the board.
Outstanding. Thank you.
very good. Unless there's any other discussion on that, I'd like to move us along. Melinda and Chris, thank you very much for being here this evening. We very much appreciate your presentation. We very much appreciate your work for the island. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you all.
Right. I would like to move us on to the next item on our agenda, which is a big deal. The changes to the King County solid waste contract arising out of some changes from King County. Jason, do you want to introduce the topic? I'm going to present on that.
So good evening. With us this evening is Jeanette Jurgensen from Been There Consulting. She stepped in and helping with the amendment to our solid waste contract with Recology. The board, I believe we briefed the board a bit up on this in terms of the way King County is collecting their revenue and their rates, and how that rates are passed along to the ratepayers. Essentially, it's done through the Recology contract, and the changes to the King County rate require us to amend our contract with Recology. We are not. This isn't specific just Mercer Island. This is happening to all the King County cities. So with that, Jeanette is much more skilled and well-versed in this topic, and will walk you through what this amendment looks like and what's in store for the Recology contract. Jeanette?
Thank you, Jason. Good evening, Chair O'Connell and board. Again, my name is Jeanette Jurgensen, and I'm with Been There Consulting, and I've been working with your city as well as a variety of other cities on the contract amendments that are required due to this King County solid waste rate restructure. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to receive direction from the Utility Board on the proposed contract amendment with Recology in order to incorporate the new King County fixed annual charge. So King County Solid Waste Division generates most of its revenue from the per ton tipping fees. That's the garbage that's picked up at the curb, in carts, in dumpsters, and taken to the transfer station. In order to cover non-disposal related costs such as recycling and waste reduction, the county is moving to a utility model starting in January. And this model has a fixed annual charge for each city and a reduced tipping fee. And this is considered revenue neutral in that the county expects the revenues from this new model with the fixed annual charge and the reduced tipping fee to be the same as if they just left it as a tipping fee. And they expect this to stabilize revenues and create a funding source for their waste reduction and recycling programs as we decrease the amount of garbage generated. This is a change that is allowed in the ILA with the city and the county. And so, like Jason said, we have to deal with it. So collection contracts such as yours have hauler billing. And these are the ones where they all need to be amended to adjust for this fixed annual charge. Currently, your contract allows the customer rates to be adjusted annually by the service component and that's related to CPI. And then the disposal component of your rate is adjusted by the King County tipping fee. The fixed annual charge is new, so there's nowhere in the contract that allows for the collection of this money for Recology to collect and then pay the county. So the cities have worked together with their haulers to figure out how to distribute the fixed annual charge across the customer base. All the Recology cities have the same model, which is a capacity-based model. So a 32-gallon garbage customer is going to pay half of a 64-gallon garbage customer. It's completely based off your container size. And we found that to be the most equitable way. One of the unique things for Recology versus the other haulers is that we've added in a reconciliation mechanism. And this is to mitigate the over collection or under collection of the fixed annual charge that Recology is collecting. As the customers change over the year, the haulers are never going to collect exactly the right amount of fixed annual charge to pay the county. So if they over collect, rates will decrease slightly in the future. If they under collect, rates will increase slightly. We found this to be the fairest model for ratepayers. In the packet is the full amount of calculations and examples. I'm going to go through an overview, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has on the specifics. So King County assigns the fixed annual charge based upon the previous full year of garbage tonnage contribution. So for Mercer Island, you contribute about 4.9% of the garbage that's going to the King County transfer stations. King County is wanting to collect $22.6 million in their fixed annual charge. Therefore, Mercer Island is going to be paying $223,000 a year in the fixed annual charge. And again, this money is going through the rates. The city does not have to pay this. In the contract amendment, Recology and the city work together to allocate that fixed annual charge across the customer base so that they can collect that $223,000 from customers. They're going to track all of the payments from customers and reconcile it against what they've paid to the county. And then again, any over collection or under collection will change future rates. So we're trying to make it so that no one's pocketing any extra money and no one's on the hook if we're short. In the last year of the contract, the amount of fixed annual charge will be overestimated slightly to make sure they are not short. This is something we're doing in every single city. And if there's any over collection, that will be given to the city to be distributed back to the ratepayers through regular programming, or however the city deems to do it. So the fixed annual charge will appear as a line item on customer bills starting in January. So you're currently going to have your current rate, so 32-gallon garbage can, and then there'll be a new line item that says King County fixed annual charge. As I mentioned, this fixed annual charge will be based on the size of the garbage container, so it's going to be different for different households based upon how much garbage you're creating. King County has committed to creating a website and messaging about the fixed annual charge because this is a line item. It's going to specifically say King County. King County is going to be responsible for that communication so they can let people know why they're doing this and how the money is going to be used. And Recology has committed to including that messaging from the county in the annual mailer that's going out for your rates, in the bills, on their website, social media, and any other ways they can share. We want to reduce the amount of calls to city staff about this and direct people to those central points of communication. As I mentioned earlier, the rate restructure itself is considered revenue neutral. However, it coincides with a 9.6% solid waste increase. So the increase that we're going to see on the disposal component of bills between the fixed annual charge and the tipping fee will be more, but it's due to that 9.6% increase, not necessarily the rate restructure. We don't have exact rates yet. They are anticipated for October 1st, which is the contractual requirement when rates are ready. And those will include the final CPI, the final fixed annual charge, and the tipping fee. And rates will continue to adjust annually. This fixed annual charge will have to be calculated every single year. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, and thanks, because I had to go out and come back in because I had technical difficulties. If I'm asking something you already mentioned, I apologize. Is the 9.6% rate increase that's already planned for a function of our of Mercer Island's contract with Recology, or is that something external to the Mercer Island Recology, some other increase?
I want to make sure I'm answering this correctly, so correct me if I'm wrong. So the current contract links the disposal component of the rate to the King County tipping fee. So as the tipping fee increases or decreases, the disposal component of the rate per the contract also increases or decreases. So this 9.6% overall increase is not quite a linear change, because we have the tipping fee going down, adding a fixed annual charge, and then overall 9.6% increase.
So are you saying that the 9.6% increase is a result of all of those things, or did the 9.6% increase pre-exist the fixed annual charge?
The 9.6 is the county's tipping fee and fixed annual charge. Bills will not see the exact 9.6% increase, because the 9.6 is just on the disposal component of the rate. The service component of the rate will be increasing by CPI.
Okay, and thank you.
Certainly. Mr. Jacobson?
Yes, I'm referring to Exhibit A1, Section 5.1.2, and it refers to the sustainability fee, which will be included, I guess, in the fact. And I was wondering what the rationale is for not itemizing it separately on customer invoices, because this is simply another tax that's being levied.
The sustainability fee, you're asking why that's not broken out? As a general rule for most cities, their sustainability fee, also called an admin fee or a franchise fee, is included in the rate and not broken out separate.
Yes, my question was, what's the rationale for not showing the ratepayer what he or she is paying in terms of taxes? Because this fee is simply a tax. It's a percentage.
So the King County is clear that this is a charge and not a tax. Or sorry, you want specifically about the sustainability fee?
Yes.
Versus this. I may have to defer to Jason to talk about this. I can talk about contracts in general. I was not there when this one was specifically created, but generally the sustainability fees are embedded in the rate as a practice.
Correct, and that's what was done when the contract was created. I'd have to go back and look through my notes. I don't recall off the top of my head, Councilmember Jacobson, on why it was broken on the way it was. I think it was just past practice with our previous consultant and how the contracts were structured, and so that's how it was done for this one. We can certainly look at breaking it out differently in the future. I believe we're about halfway through this contract cycle with the current hauler, so it's not too far off in terms of when we have to make a decision on the future of solid waste from Mercer Island. But my recollection was it was a consultant recommendation. It was a previous consultant, and it was based off past practice with the other contracts.
My recollection is there was also some hijinks being done by the Bertland Bassett City Council to try to hide some of this stuff from the public, and there was a considerable outcry about that at the time. But my question is then, is that sustainability fee remitted to the city?
Yes, the sustainability fee is, I mean, it comes back to the city, yes.
Okay. And that's 3.5% of whatever the total bill is. Is that correct? Plus excise tax on the sustainability.
On gross revenues to the hauler. So that excludes Dropbox disposal and all the taxes and fees.
The excise.
The sustainability fee is just on the gross revenue. So your rate that you pay, the city receives the admin fee on that, but it's
Right.
not an additional fee on the other taxes and fees that you pay.
Okay, Jason, I'd like to talk to you off. There's no sense. We got lots to do tonight, so I would like to get together and talk to you about this, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Are there other questions from other board members? Meredith, A, you're muted again, but B, let's give everybody else a chance first. Are there any other questions from any other board members?
No, not from George.
All right, Meredith, what was your other question? Jeanette, unless you have something to add, can I ask you to stop sharing your screen, please?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Tim. I did not have another question. I forgot to lower the hand.
Oh, okay, very good. Yes, I have a question, and it's actually it's two parts, both of them though, and I'm going off of your Meredith's presentation here, the calculations overview. The very last one. In the last year, the contract, slightly more FAC will be collected to satisfy county's FAC requirement. Any over collection will be given to the city, what it said. And my question is that what it means? Is that over collection given to the city, or is it reimbursed to ratepayers?
It's a great question. When we were first setting this up, we looked at a variety of different models, and we really expect this amount to be pocket change. So depending on how things change over the year, we're only expecting the over collection to be less than $1 in the year over to customers. So one thing we did look at was, does it make sense to reimburse this back to the ratepayers and the cost for that? And then does everybody get the same amount, or how do we do it with changing containers? And the cities that we worked with on this as the model cities, their attorneys agreed that due to the very small amount, this would probably be the best way, but it was explored.
Thank you. Unless anybody has another question, one more, and this actually comes out of, and Jason, I'll defer. I don't know who prepared the paperwork that's labeled First Amendment, the draft that was included in the packet.
What is go ahead. What's your specific question on the
very last page, which includes the calculations, indicates that the new customer rate as of January 125 for a 32 or 35 gallon cart is 37.07 per month. How does that compare to the current charge?
Do you have that in front of you? I don't have it right in front of me.
I can look it up.
Yeah, I don't have the current charge right in front of me. That's what I'm looking for. Is the current?
Gotcha. Gotcha.
I can look forward to it. We can let us do some digging on our end. We have it. We'll just pull it and give it to you. I believe Chair O'Connell, Jeanette has a couple more slides to get through too. Before she's finished as well.
Right. Okay. Jeanette, if you could go through that quickly, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, sir. The 2023 rates for a residential 32 gallon can is $35.08. And as far as the slides, they were just really more the formality of next steps and then contact information. So
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there other questions for Jeanette or for staff on this issue? Hearing none, Jeanette, thank you very much for your time this evening. We really appreciate your being here, and we appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of the city. Thank you. All right, next item of business, we get to rates. First on the agenda is the EMS rate. So is the author of that memo, Ben, gonna be participating? Yeah, there we go, Ben.
Go ahead, Ben.
And unless you want to introduce the issue, I'll turn it over to you to decide how you want to do that.
Go ahead, Ben. It's all yours. You're looking good in the tie this evening.
Thank you, Jason. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Let me know, and you can see that. There we go. All right. All right, so we'll jump into it. So like Jason said, good evening, Utility Board. My name is Ben Schumacher, Financial Analyst here at the City of Mercer Island. So I just have 7 slides to walk you through tonight. We're going to cover our EMS rate update discussion, and that's emergency medical service, as well as our stormwater utility rate update. We'll then touch base on kind of what our mid-biennial rate update schedule looks like, touch points for the Utility Board going forward, and then we'll have time for questions throughout. So we'll take questions at the end of each rate discussion as well as at the end of the presentation. Jumping right into it. So EMS rate. So this is one of our simpler rates. Saying that is just meaning that it's primarily driven by one factor, and that's our cost of living adjustment. So some background information, our EMS rate is driven entirely by the average cost of 4 firefighter positions, the City of Mercer Island Fire Department. And that's the fully burdened cost, so salaries plus benefits. Those firefighter positions are excluding the chief position, deputy chief position, as well as the fire marshal position. What happened for the COLA in these are entirely influenced by the COLA. City staff saw a historically high COLA, or the CPIW for Seattle, Tacoma, Bellevue area, which is what we base our COLA adjustments on. And this is by bargaining unit. So this is our fire bargaining unit. We saw a historically high CPIW for 2022, which influences our 2023 rates. More specifically, the first half CPIW rate, so it's the average of the first 6 months of the year. For 2022, that was 8.6%. As some context for how high that percentage was, to get to anywhere above 6%, you have to look back to 1990, the early 1990s, for a CPI that's anywhere close, and that was about 6.5% back then. So the firefighter staff received that 8.6% COLA for their bargaining agreement, as well as a 3.75% additional COLA that was the result of transition impact bargaining with the Eastside Fire and Rescue contract. So as city staff bargained that contract, 3.75% was determined fair for an additional COLA to firefighting staff, and that was applied for the 2023 rates as well. And then the Eastside Fire and Rescue contract will go into effect January 1 of 2024. So what all that means is that staff is recommending an increase of 10.01% from our 2023 rates, driven entirely from these COLA adjustments throughout 2023. What that looks like in terms of dollars is about $1.05 every other month, 53 cents if you round every month for a single family bill. So at this point, I'll stop sharing and we'll open the floor to discussion from the utility board.
I recognize Board Member Milton. You had your hand up first.
Yeah, I guess so. My question is, and I may have missed this in one of the previous board meetings that we discussed, but why is there still going to be an EMS utility tax after transitioning everything to Eastside Fire?
Good question. So the EMS rate is a revenue requirement that is relating to those 4 firefighting positions. These were originally hired in 1996 as to kind of compensate for the extra additional services that are needed during a high on-call period.
Yeah.
And it's a transition to ratepayers through this rate. The rate revenue is just the recouping of those 4 firefighter positions. The city is still paying those 4 firefighter positions by a contract.
Okay. So
if that's getting questions, so we're still paying for these 4 firefighting positions.
The city will be paying them those individuals or those positions even after the transition of the rest of the system to Eastside Fire? Or does this revenue end up being paid directly to? Yeah, I just don't understand the.
Okay, so that this is Matt Morgan, your finance director. If I can just chime in, so it's a good question, and essentially what Ben is alluding to is that these costs don't go away, and we still have the right, and as a result of the negotiations with Eastside Fire, the ability to continue to use the EMS rate, the EMS fee that we charge, to offset the annual costs associated with contracting with Eastside Fire. So it offsets the costs for the multi-million-dollar contract for the service that Eastside's providing. Deputy Finance Director Loan Totals here. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, you said it exactly how I would. Again, Lawan Tellier, Deputy Finance Director. This is just a funding mechanism to pay for a level of service, whether that fire service is provided by Mercer Island firefighters or now contracted with Eastside Fire and Rescue.
Got it.
Will.
I'll sound like maybe the ignorant person here, but I'm just curious, what's the significance of the 10th of 1% on the increase, 10.01%? Why isn't it just 10%? Or is there any significance to that?
No significance. I have a hard time rounding off percentages, so I included it just to save myself.
Anyone else? Meredith.
Yeah, is this, maybe I missed this, is this a 1 year increase that we're talking about? So if for some reason we had some massive decrease in inflation next year, would it go down?
Yeah, so this is just an increase from 2023 rates to 2024 and only affecting the 2024 rates.
And so believe the contracts go down if when CPI is flat or negative. They're locked in.
I'm sorry, Steve, I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry. I just the way that usually the way these contracts work is that the CPI doesn't go even if there was a negative CPI, there's a negative adjustment to the firefighters' contracts.
All subject to bargaining, and when is the contract up?
So the Eastside Fire and contract or Eastside Fire and Rescue contract will start in 2024, and I believe it's for. Oh, I don't have the exact years in front of me, but I want to say it's to the tune of 5 to 10 years.
10 years.
10 years.
Well, but to the degree that this represents 3.75% that was added on top to offset the impact on the firefighters, and that's subject to market. When is that subject to change?
The 3.75% was only for 2023. It's just a one-time cost of living adjustment, or one-time adjustment to compensate for firefighters moving contracts.
So that should go away in 2024.
Yeah, that 3.75% is only seen in 2023.
That's good.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Sorry, Ben. I hope I didn't sound like I was cross-examining there.
No, it's good. Appreciate the question.
Thank you. Anyone else from the board? Any other questions? Steve, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one last piece of this, which is there any appetite within the utility board to recommend to the city council that this end up being, especially with this, all of this being pushed back into a complete outsourcing, does it really make sense to have this utility anymore? It was a dodge at one point in the past in order to get out of including it into normal taxes by adding it as a utility fee. It isn't in any way related to being a utility fee anymore. It's just a specific service level that the city is requiring of the number of units, the number of personnel that are on the island to take care of the populace. So that's just a contracted rate now with East Side Fire. It is the rate that we pay for the services that we desire as a city. It doesn't really make sense to continue to have it as a utility.
Steve, I understand your point. And Meredith, I do see your hand. I will get to you in just 1 second. But let's just explore what Steve was just saying. I mean, if you'd like to make a motion along those lines, Steve, that seems completely germane to this discussion to me.
Fair enough. That's why I kind of want to open it up as a discussion item. If it would require being done as a motion to then discuss, that we could certainly. I'll phrase it that way separately.
Okay, so we'll take that as a motion for discussion about recommending. I'm trying to rephrase what you said so that we could capture it accurately in the minutes. A motion to recommend consideration for recharacterizing the EMS utility. It's just another operating cost of the city.
Yeah, to basically suggest to the council that they fold the EMS utility, amounts back into regular city general funds rather than as a separate utility.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a second for that motion?
Sure, I'll second it. I mean, I'd like to talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, we need in order to talk about it, we need a second.
I'll second it. Yeah.
Motion's been made and seconded. Will, are you your hand is raised? Are you responding to the motion or something else?
It was more of a comment, so I'm not responding to the motion.
Well, don't mean to cut off your comment, so please hang on to it. But there is a motion that's been seconded on the floor for discussion. Is there anybody who would like to comment? We'll try to be parliamentary about it. The city paid to send me to this parliamentary training. I might as well take advantage of it. So is there anyone who would like to speak to the motion?
So Tim, if I want to speak to the motion, do you want my hand up and for me to be recognized, or how? I'm not sure about the process.
I think the hands do help, actually, Meredith. So
yeah, and that's fine. So does Will want to? Yeah.
Will, are you talking about the motion or something else?
Well,
please. Okay, if you have something to say about the motion, please go for it.
I guess just a comment. Maybe I may misunderstand the terms of the contract, but I thought there was part of it that was built in as somewhat of a trial period to revert back to, if it doesn't work out, basically to revert control back to the city. And so my only comment is, one, is that, do I have the right read on that? And maybe we can answer that here, but if so, Steve, to your motion, would it make sense to do that now or to wait until this contract term is up?
I confess I have not read the contract at Fire. Does anybody have any inclination is Will right that we have some period to reevaluate? Matt, do you have an answer to that, or is that where your hand is raised? Or
please pose a question again. We're behind the scenes running some numbers.
Thank you. The question is, Will is under the impression that our contract with Eastside Fire has some period under which we could review and the city could withdraw from the contract. Is that a fair paraphrase, Will?
And to that, I would submit that the agreement has already been established and voted on by the city council. And so the really is the agreement's in place. And so I will also add that the amount that is anticipated to result from the EMS utility tax as it be in 2024 is about $745,000. So if we were to sunset, if the utility board is to recommend sunsetting this tax, the result would be a direct impact to the general fund, which was I don't think in the purview of the city staff when we entered negotiations with the Eastside Fire organization. So we would be looking at a $750,000 impact to the general fund, which we would be hard pressed to find a way to absorb that in the near term. That would put the general fund out of balance.
I appreciate it. I will say I don't think that was the tenor of Steve's motion. I thought it was more of a, we should be evaluating this. We should be discussing this.
So if I may, Chair O'Connell, can we get the motion repeated so we can actually get it drafted down? Steve?
Yeah, please. Steve, you want to repeat your motion, please?
Fair enough. Yeah, so the motion is basically to have let's see. Again, I'm not as good with the Jurassic parliamentary procedure stuff as I could be. My intent is that for us to discuss the recommending to the city that they get rid of the EMS tax or the EMS utility fee and properly account for it as a tax from the city rather for these same services, rather than having it as a standalone utility tax or a standalone utility. I'm not sure I would vote for it at the moment, but I wanted to have the discussion about it. So that get closer.
So
Can I make my, oh, go ahead, Jason.
So just to be clear, I think Matt's struggling with it too. So just to be clear, you're looking to not call it the EMS, not call it an EMS utility tax. You want to call it something different other than the EMS utility tax.
No, I think it should be done as a standard, like the rest of the EMS services. For instance, I'm not sure what the total number is on an annual basis to Eastside Fire, but I assume it's significantly higher than 745,000.
We could get you that number if you give us a moment, but it's upwards of $7 million.
Right. So my question is this particular piece is, well, yeah, I won't go any further on that part. So my discussion, or I guess the motion itself would be to recommend to the council that it should review, and maybe that'd be a better way of stating it, review dissolving the EMS utility and instead accounting for all of those Eastside Fire contracts out of general fund. So that would be the motion. Where it goes from there is, yeah.
So are you suggesting, I mean, this is a funding source that has been used to pay for positions. And I don't know that I certainly wasn't around for it, so I don't know the basis for when it was first put in. But we still are going to have a fire service that requires paying for it. And so are you suggesting that the city should somehow acquire these funds through a different mechanism because it's not really associated with utility anymore, and that somehow the city can levy some kind of tax somewhere else for it? I think that's a legal question that's actually quite significant and would require the city attorney. I guess that's whether we pay for it directly or whether we contract somebody to do it. It's monies that are going to be used for those functions. And one can get into an argument about whether doing it the way they did it in the first place was really a utility, but that's a whole different argument.
So, I mean, I just as a response to that, and then I want to make sure we let Councilman Jacobson work as well or speak as well. But so my approach to it is purely logical consistency. So if the emergency services on the island is a utility, then why wouldn't the entire thing be done through as a utility? Why would only 10% of our EMS be done as a utility tax or as a utility as opposed to being a part of the general fund tax. So that's really the nature of my question. And I didn't understand the scale, for instance, of those two numbers. That was something that was educational out of this discussion. So as I mentioned, so I'll stop there for a second
let me recognize Councilmember Jacobson. Let's get another voice on this.
Just briefly, I'd say two things. Number one is the opportunity or the ability that Mercer Island to walk away from that agreement is limited to non-performance by Eastside Fire and Rescue. So it's not, well, after 2 years, we kind of don't like these guys. I guess we'd like to move on. And of course, reinstituting a service would be, very costly. But be that as it may, I also think that I'd suggest that what the finance manager Warnick has suggested is that this opens up an aspect of that which was not contemplated when the city council looked at how do we can we finance the bill that Eastside Fire and Rescue has said they'll provide these services for. If I'm correctly quoting you, Matt, and I think that is something that certainly the finance department will need to look at pretty carefully. And I'm not sure whether our dealing with the tax in this institution or for this commission or this board to deal with it, let me put it that way, is a wise thing to do without having the finances really thought through pretty carefully on this. Because it is a big number, and this is roughly, if my jungle math is right, about 10% of the revenue that would be used to offset the total cost of the Eastside Fire and Rescue Services. Am I right, Pat?
Yeah, I mean, I do get Steve's logical concern about the issue. I mean, but on the other hand, this has been the structure for a great many years for reasons that are historical more than logical. We have funded about 10% of the island's firefighting service through this EMS vehicle that's tacked onto the utility bill rather than paid for out of general funds. And but Matt's absolutely right. The money's got to come from somewhere, and the fact that we funded 10% of the fire department through the utility fund. I'm sorry, not the utility fund. Let me be precise. On the as a utility rather than as a part of the general fund is just how we chose to pay for it.
And 78% of the fire department's calls are non-fire. 22% are fire. So there are a whole lot of things going on here, and so at any rate, I point that not to try to direct this board to do anything, because I have great regard for all of your opinions, and I understand the logic behind what Steve suggested, but it might want further study.
Thank you. Will.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the council member for that clarification. And I was going back to, I think I watched some of the debate, and it was what I was drawing on was all the debate around the question of how can the city enforce level of service expectations and what mechanisms do they have? And I think that's a totally separate topic from what Steve is raising.
Matt?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, we confirm the impact to the general fund by removing the EMS utility tax in 2024 is $737,000. And so I just want to get that number out there for the record.
Thank you. Meredith, and then unless there's anybody new on the topic, I'm going to call the question. So Meredith, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was going to suggest we call the question. I think Steve's right. I think there's a really interesting, fun legal question about whether this was ever really a utility fee to begin with, but it's got long historical reasons, and I'm not sure, certainly here and now is the place to get into that.
Unless there's further discussion, Steve, I do see your hand raised. If you are the motion's author, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of the discussion that I was hoping to get, I think that's been had. I would withdraw the motion.
Motion's been withdrawn. Thank you very much. And Steve, just I do think it's a valuable conversation. Meredith, just if you go back in history, a lot of the structure resulted from some legal disputes as to the funding of how EMS and BLS was paid for. All right, and unless there's further discussion on that, the actual issue before us was the EMS rate, and there is a recommendation from city staff that we recommend to the city council that they approve a 10.01% increase. Ben, I hope you weren't offended that I referred to EMS about 10%.
Totally fine.
Is there a motion to accept the city staff recommendation on the proposed EMS?
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Steve so moves. Is there a second?
I'll second it, George.
George Marshall seconds. Discussion. Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor of recommending to the city council that we ratify the staff recommendation for a 10.01% increase in the EMS rate, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. All right. Last item of business. Well, no, that's not quite right. But next item of business is the stormwater rate recommendation. Ben, I assume that's you that are going to take the beginning of 4 here.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and reshare my screen. We'll continue in that PowerPoint. Okay. So with the EMS handled,
You still got your EMS slides up, Ben.
Yeah, we're going right along. There we go. So moving on to our stormwater utility rate. So this one's a little more complicated than the EMS rate, where there's only one primary driver for our EMS rate. There are multiple for our stormwater utility. And those primary drivers are operating costs relating to our stormwater program. And just as a reminder for the board, additional staffing was added in 2023 as part of our 2022 discussion in the form of a 0.5% or 0.5 FTE increase to an existing staff member, or stormwater quality tech. And then a stormwater fund paying for a portion of an additional CIP inspector that was hired for in 2023. We also have our capital program costs, which are a primary driver of our stormwater utility rate. Our 2023-2024 total capital costs for the stormwater CIP program were 2.3 million, which is traditionally higher than what we usually see for our stormwater utility. And then we also have fiscal policies that are really driving our rate increases year over year for our stormwater fund. Just as a reminder for the board, our fiscal policies for the stormwater fund specifically are maintaining a 45-day operating and maintenance reserve, as well as 1% of all capital assets. So moving to our rate update recommendation, staff recommends an increase of 8% from our 2023 rates. In terms of dollars, this looks like 1.72 every month for the average single family. And then you can see some sample bills at the end or at the bottom of your screen in the tables there. I will go ahead and stop sharing and open to questions and discussion.
Thank you. Questions for Ben? Steve.
To verify, or I guess the people who'd had more of a chance to get deeper into the financials on this, what were the kind of primary drivers of the 8% increase? Was it the staff costs and the CPIW type costs that we were talking about in the other piece? Or?
Yes, good question. On the operating side, it was our CPIW again. So most of the employees that are represented, or most of the employees that work in the stormwater fund are represented under our AFSCME contract, bargaining contract. The CPIW for that contract was not as significant as there was a ceiling in that contract for 2023. So it wasn't that 8.6%. It was slightly lower at 6% or 6%. And that ceiling is still in the contract in effect 2024. So there's a little protection there. And then we also had some construction related inflation, more so for the capital side that we saw. So that was really a primary driving factor there.
in terms of active projects or projects that are like on the work plan in the future, like bids on projects?
Those active projects.
Okay. Thank you.
Meredith.
Yeah, Ben, if I was smarter and quicker, I could do all this math in my head. So we've talked about increases for the EMS and increases for the stormwater. What's it going to look like in total for the ratepayer? Has somebody looked at that?
We don't have the total number yet. So we have the sample for our EMS and our stormwater, what we're passing on. I think monthly it's looking like about just some quick math, $2.2 or $2.30 about on the average monthly bill, or $2.20, excuse me. We haven't nailed down the impact of water and sewer. Those are, I think water, we'll touch on it on the next steps at the end of the presentation, but I think water will be a little more involved. We're looking at a bond issuance. I don't want to jump ahead of Matt and his work on that. But we're looking at bond issuance for funding in the water fund that affects rates there, as well as sewer also having a very significant capital program over the next 2 to 4 years, which will most likely result in outside funding as well.
All right, thank you.
Meredith, I'll just tell you, be prepared for next time. Water and sewer is where the real money is, as the saying goes. So,
yeah.
Other
and garbage.
Well, but we don't set the rates on garbage. That's in the contract. At our next meeting, be prepared for that. Those are typically lively discussions because they involve more dollars. Other discussion about the stormwater. I mean, and I'll ask a question just because, I mean, an 8% increase, it may only be $1.70 something, but still on a percentage basis, pretty significant increase. Excuse me. I'm sorry, I apologize. The operating expenses are 7%. What's driving the capital side that we have an overall increase of 8%?
So it's really the total expenditures for the capital program and the scope of the projects, or just the breadth of projects that we looked to tackle in the 2023-2024 biennium. So total, that was 2.3 million. I don't have the exact numbers, but I know that's higher than prior years. I can get those numbers for you. But it was really just, I think throughout all three utilities, we had a very significant increase in capital expenditures due to just the infrastructure of the island. We're really looking to replace a lot of this aging infrastructure, and the capital program reflected for all three utilities really reflected that kind of scope of work over for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I can just speak to briefly. I mean, you're seeing inflation everywhere. We're seeing it on the capital side too, with cost of materials. The time for projects, it's taking longer to get things done. The cost is higher now than it was a few years ago, just because of it. So we do have a very aggressive capital program in all three utilities, just because of, as Ben mentioned, the age and condition of our infrastructure. We sort of refer to the stormwater as the baby of the infrastructure of the three utilities. However, it's still got its own set of unique challenges and issues to address as well. But certainly, as we get into, as Chair O'Connell said, as we get into the water and sewer discussion next month, that there's some real work, and there's some numbers in front of us that we're currently underway on projects with that you're all very familiar with, but also on projects that are coming down in the next 2 to 6 years as well. So lots to talk about.
Yeah, great, Steve.
Yeah, well, so I'm sorry, I jumped on in the memo where it had the discussion of we had talked with previous kind of finance chairs about the concept of like blended average, looking at, okay, well, we don't want to do a big increase in 1 year, so we tend to spread those increases over years. And as I look at the last page here, where it shows the rate proposal being 8% for this coming year, but also basically 8% carried out each year over the next till 2028. I'm assuming that's not based on inflation, because the assumption, I'm assuming they're not assuming that inflation is going to be at a comparable rate of what it was for the first half of this last year going forward. So why is it that kind of 8% carried forward into the future?
So I can speak to that a little bit. So that 8% is that average rate. We always do the average smoothing rate based on prior rate studies. What's really driving that for this is those fiscal policies, maintaining those fiscal policies throughout the 6-year period, as well as stormwater was significantly susceptible to the increase in operating costs because of how much smaller of a utility fund it is, and how much inflation we started seeing relating to those operating costs. So that was really a primary driver of that 8%. We also were looking at outside funding for our other 2 utilities, and stormwater didn't have, it started to hit that need for outside funding based on our rate projections. In 25, we were able to, with the average rate and with moving some CIP projects around in our program, move that outside funding need to 2027. And it would only be in our rate projections. It's 4 years out, so who knows what it'll look like in our next rate study. But I think that was really the primary driving factor. That 8% is really just a result of kind of our inflationary pressures that we're seeing currently, and how the stormwater reflects inflationary pressures more so than the other 2 utility funds.
If I may just add on to that a bit, the board may or may not remember, we are under a new NPDES permit with new requirements. It was issued, I believe, last year, and we're in the first year, possibly just over a year, and the new NPDES permit that has new reporting requirements that's required of us each and every year. So that staffing increase was in direct correlation to the NPDES permit change, the additional requirements associated to it, as well as just the increased amount of work and type of work that we're doing within our stormwater utility. The other piece I'll say too, and I'll just remind the board, is we go through the capital program each year, but we really look at that 2-year horizon as part of the budget process. And if we're talking rates, and the capital expenses tend to be significant. If the board wants us to pull back on some of those capital reinvestment opportunities in the future, that's something that we can certainly talk about as part of the budget process, and we can skinny down that capital plan if that's the direction of the board and the council. That's certainly something that can be discussed. I will say, in terms of as we get into the bond issuance conversation that we'll have in October, and as Ben sort of alluded to here, we have looked at it on the stormwater side. The capital dollars associated with stormwater projects is significantly smaller than what the capital expenses are on the water and sewer side. So a combination of just what the types of projects are, and the timing for them associated with the requirements of bond issuance, as well as the dollar amount, sort of led us towards perhaps the water side first and foremost, as we'll talk about next month. We're getting a little bit of ourselves, but that's certainly something that we are considering on the back end and talking about internally often as we look ahead to rates and capital investment needs.
Meredith.
Chair, if I just may add to that explanation, excuse me, forgive me. I just wanted to make mention that this time last year, we heard the point that this board raised, which was around generational equity and trying to spread out the costs of this significant capital work for not only stormwater utility, but water and sewer as well, to spread those costs out. But given that we're starting to address infrastructure enhancements that are going to last anywhere from 20 to 50 years. And so we heeded that advice. And that's what we're doing with all 3 utilities. We're really trying to be introspective, identify the projects where they qualify for taking out a long-term loan, essentially a bond issuance to help pay for that and keep our annual rate increases down, along with the overall point that Steve mentioned earlier, which is a smooth rate increase. We're really trying to not have peaks and valleys with the annual rate adjustments, but to rather stick to a smooth rate increase over time. So those two guiding principles have guided our work behind the scenes, and we'll be able to speak more to that when we talk and meet again in October to talk about the water utility, because it's a very different picture in that regard.
Thank you, Matt. Let's see. I think I was going to recognize Meredith. You would want to speak, and then Steve. I have a comment as well, but I will wait my turn. Meredith, you first.
Yeah, and so I'd love to be correct if I'm not understanding this correctly. I thought Steve suggested that of this 8% smoothed rate, almost 7% of it was inflation, but am I also now understanding that in fact it's not the 7% inflation, but a greater percentage of it is really the capital projects? And my other question, and Tim, you might even be able to answer this, is this a rate that we will again look at next year so that we are perhaps approving it for this year, but not for the entire 4 years?
Yeah, I will answer that question if it's okay, Steve.
Yeah.
Yes, Meredith. We look at these rates every year. Kind of the deeper dive is connected with the biennium, but we do look at them every year. The 8% smooth is a projection, which will be viewed every year. In fact, if you look at the very last page of Ben's memo on the stormwater, you'll see that over the last 2 years, we've had, 2020, 2021, and now the current one we're talking about, we've had 3 different smooth rates, right? 3.2, 5.5, and now 8.0. So, don't get too attached to whatever rate we're talking about right now.
Okay.
It'll be reviewed in a year.
Okay.
Steve, you were next.
Yeah, so we'll just, I guess, two questions. One was on the bonding piece. You mentioned that in terms of it being much smaller dollars in general in comparison to the water systems, et cetera. Do the bonds have to be done independently for each utility?
That was going to be my question.
Okay, yeah, because it sounded like you were talking like maybe that made it harder to try and do bonding for the smaller utility because they couldn't be combined together across the utilities. Is that a requirement of kind of how it works?
Well, it all ties back to the capital plan, the spending plan. What are we looking to invest? When are we going to look to make the investments? And do we have the staffing resources to get the work done? Because whenever you do a bond issuance, you have a limited span of time to spend those dollars. And so it's a little bit of a shell game in that regard, and cash, and it's really a game of cash flow management. So when we did the rates modeling work last fall with FCS Group, we had scheduled, working through an example here, to do a bond issuance for the water utility fiscal year 2023. We've been watching the water fund cash flow, and we have decided not to do that because we want to rely on the water fund's fund balance as the capital project work has really started to ramp up. And so a lot of pre-construction work and a lot of design work for the utility team this year has happened through the summer. And we have been in our monthly meetings with the capital project leads in discussion about how the construction work is actually really ramping up for the water utility this fall. And so the water fund's fund balance is helping pay for those costs through the end of this year into the first quarter of next year. And we want to be really strategic when we do the issuance, because that essentially starts the clock. So we're going to talk about some nuances about a declaration for the intent to reimburse, which tries to essentially buy us more time so that 3-year time period could potentially be extended to 4.5 years, so that we can really spend down all that money and increase the actual issuance. So right now we're looking at somewhere between 15 to 17 million for the water fund. If we can increase the time frame from which we can use that money, we could potentially increase the issuance, but you have to have a spending plan. So I'm going to submit that we probably are not well equipped to combine the issuances across the utilities. And I'll rely on our Deputy Finance Secretary, Lawan Tuttle, to remind me why. But our plan is to just be as strategic as possible, because every time we do an issuance, it costs significant money. It's upwards of $100,000 to do an issuance, between the staff time and all of the 6 to 10 weeks of work to see an issuance through. But I'm going to stop there and open it up. Should there be any more questions on what I just mentioned?
Well, and then just I guess my follow up to the bond question was, even with is the current budget including the assumption of the issuance of those bonds, or is it basically, do you have to budget it out assuming that you haven't done, since you haven't issued the bonds yet, you can't include them into the budget yet? Because with the 8% that are there now, with the assumption that if it's assuming that the bonds are going to be issued, then the 8% is including the fact that we're going outside and bringing in money, and it's still 8% even though we're going out and borrowing that money. And I guess that's why I want to make sure I understood the two of those.
You are correct. Our budget reflects the assumption that we are going out for a $19 million bond issuance for the water fund. We were able to secure a low interest loan from the Public Works Board for about $3 million. So that essentially is free money. The interest rates are extremely low. So that was a competitive process where we were successful. So that's going to bring down our issuance, our bond issuance total, potentially. But you are correct. We are assuming that 8% assumes that our budget has already accounted for the need to go out for a bond issuance for the water utility. That 8% is inclusive of that.
Wow.
Just a quick correction. Thank you, Matt. This is for the 8% stormwater. The bond issuance is assumed. Water fund, we needed a bond issuance a lot sooner. So we're looking at 2023 originally, like Matt mentioned. And now we're looking at 2024 as the actual year. For the stormwater fund specifically, and it's 8% kind of smooth average, we weren't looking at a bond issuance potentially until 2027. So that 8% is factoring into the idea that we would potentially need to go out for outside funding in 2027. Early projection, that's at the very end of this kind of rate projection that we do. But early idea was it's to the tune of about 2.5 million.
Got it. So there's not much change in it because it's kind of going into the next cycle that's bringing the balances back up into the next cycle, as opposed to whereas we're kind of spending the balances that we have through the current cycle.
Right. That's 2 budget cycles into the future. So
fair.
We are mid biennium here. So is there further discussion? Questions? There is a motion on the table to recommend to council to approve the staff recommendation of a 10.1% increase in the stormwater rates. Further discussion? Hearing none. Oh, Steve, are you about to say something? No.
It's 8% on the stormwater.
I'm sorry. What did I say?
You said the 10 point.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ben's got me so fascinated by these hundredths of a percent that keeps on sticking in my head.
I mean, this one's not 8.01, so
8.0, an 8.0% increase in the stormwater rates. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 And thank you, Steve.
I'm sorry, Meredith. You voted aye, right?
I did.
Very good. Thank you. All right. And just in case, did I call the nays? All those opposed? Nobody. All right. Thank you very much. And Ben, thank you for your time. I believe the last item of business that we have to attend to is the work plan, what the board is going to be doing from here. And I think we've already talked about some of it.
One more piece, Chair O'Connell. We do have
Ben.
the next steps as part of this mid-biennial rate update schedule. If we want to touch on that real quick, just one slide. as part, kind of as a continuation of that rate discussion. So go ahead and share my screen really fast here. We'll get this done in a few minutes. Okay, so what you have in front of you is a loose schedule of utility board, or not loose schedule, is our schedule of utility board touch points as part of these rate discussions, as part of the mid-biennial budget process. So we're here on the first box on September 12th. We had our discussion about EMS and stormwater. What you can look forward to is another touch base or touch point on October 10th. And we'll bring our water and sewer rate recommendations in front of the utility board then, as well as a overview of our water bond issuance that we're looking at 2024. And then finally, we'll have our all rate recommendations going in front of the city council on November 21st. And as we have done in prior years, city staff is more than happy to invite Chair O'Connell to come speak to those rate recommendations in front of the city council.
I've gotten used to doing that now. A request, Ben, as we've been discussing, the water and sewer discussion is substantially more complicated, going to be even more complicated by the bonding issues. Can you and your colleagues at the staff make a commitment to us to get those numbers to us at least a few days before the meeting? I think having the ability to look at them ahead of time makes for a much more informed discussion.
If I can ask for some clarification, do you mean numbers as in memos or what?
Well, the same kind of analysis as you provided us here for the stormwater.
Okay.
So yes, yeah. So Ben, I'm sorry to see the screen. So if you could stop, maybe share it there. Perfect. Thank you. So
there we go.
So Chair O'Connell, yeah, we will work to get the packet out on time that week. We normally shoot for that Thursday afternoon, Friday at the latest before the utility board meeting. We will certainly work to try and meet that Thursday delivery as well. So you have the good solid weekend ahead of the meeting to review things and ask questions. And I will say, if there are questions from the board ahead of time, please don't hesitate to send us those questions ahead of time so your staff can prepare answers to it. We'll certainly cover them in the meeting as well, but it allows staff a little bit more time to be thorough and detailed in our responses if the board can formulate some of those questions ahead of time. Good discussion this evening, though.
Yeah, it has been, and I appreciate it. And Jason, I think both of your comments are well taken. Thank you. And I don't think there's anything else to discuss about the work plan for the next meeting. In November, we're in recess. December, we have Recology coming before us, which will be really kind of interesting as I and everyone in my neighborhood sits here with our yard waste bins that have not yet been collected. So that'll be an entertaining discussion. Is there anything else? Is there anything else? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be, peremptory about it.
Jim?
Yes.
This is Jake. I just want to, on behalf of my colleagues on the city council, tell you how much we appreciate the hard work that this board does on very difficult subjects which don't bring love to everybody's heart, have to write a bigger check at the end of the month. But thank you for your hard work. We rely on the fact that you do that, and your recommendations carry a hell of a lot of weight with us. So thank you very much for all your effort.
Thank you very much for your comments, council member. We on behalf of the board, we do appreciate hearing it. Thank you. Meredith, anything? Yes, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I have a quick question. My apologies because I had big technical difficulties. So I left, and I don't know whether I have now been volunteered to be on the committee. And I was first going to try, I'm happy to do it. I was first going to try to, I had some traveling schedule issues, and we can do this offline. I think we can work around them, but I wanted to make those clear before I completely volunteered. And who's my co-person?
Will, and Steve is an alternate.
Okay. And tell me when, and I'll talk about, not during this meeting, I can tell whomever what my travel conflicts are.
Jason, I think that really is directed to you or whoever from your group is going to be coordinating all of this. That, I suspect the sooner that you get some kind of a schedule to Meredith and Will and Steve, the better.
Yeah, Jason, I'll send you an email offline about what they are, and you can tell me if they're prohibitive or not.
Yep, no worries. We'll look to get you scheduled, and I appreciate you all volunteering.
Thank you. there anything else that we should discuss being added to the work plan? We do have, 3 more meetings yet this year. Oh, the to be scheduled. I'm meeting from a distance. That's what happens. Thank you, Steve. All right, hearing none. Jason, yes.
Sorry, the TV schedule one sparked my memory. So the to be scheduled is SPU contract amendment. I spoke with SPU staff this afternoon. They are working on a response to some of the purveyor's proposal, counter proposal. So we're in the midst of the long story short is we're in the midst of contract negotiations. Once we get the contract to a further along piece, we'll bring it back to the board to brief the board. But it's probably going to be, in all reality, it's probably going to be early next year before the board sees that contract amendment, just given the pace at which those contract negotiations are taking place.
And remind us, Jason, when is that contract actually up?
Oh, that contract's not actually up until like 2060. This was a pre-negotiated reopener, one of the 2 reopeners in the contract. And so our contract is well into the future. There's some specific items in the contract that they're looking to amend. So that's what's going on right now behind the scenes.
Good. Thank you. All right. It's already past our 6:45 mark. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Meredith, seconded by Steve, really quickly. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Great. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll talk in a month.
Right.
All right. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. Bye now.